What is up guys, Dzeeff here. Today I wanted to talk about why so many players hate the new Synchro festival in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Now obviously the previous two festivals have had their fair share of problems. People in the Xyz festival complained about the self-TK deck, which at that point was completely unhit, and in the normal and rare rarity festival it seemed like there was only a couple decks that you really could choose from if you wanted to do well. But I really feel like the Synchro festival has been the most hated event in Master Duel so far, and in today's video I wanted to talk about why. Now I didn't know this when I made my video a couple days ago because I was obviously gone over the weekend at the YCS, but people had already figured out a number of problems with this event before the event had started. So personally, I feel like there are two main things that people complain about when it comes to the Synchro festival, at least from what I've seen in my own comment section and from my friends. So the first thing is that people do not like the ban list, or specifically they don't feel they hit certain decks hard enough, and the second problem is that a lot of the best decks are very spammy. Now the second problem is a little bit harder to deal with because I think fundamentally Synchro summoning as a mechanic is usually going to be spammy in some way, especially the good decks. And I almost feel like it's worse in this mode because basically every good Synchro deck is a spam deck, where in the regular ranked mode you at least have some other Xyz decks or fusion decks or link decks that maybe don't spam monsters as much. But there is an alternative deck that you can play in this format, and unfortunately that deck is very hated by the community. So one deck that is really holding back the Synchro festival event is True Draco. Now True Draco was outright banned pretty much in the Xyz festival. If you remember that ban list, every single main deck True Draco monster was banned. This time around though, and I do not know why Konami did this, Konami did not ban any additional True Draco cards besides Masterpiece, which was already banned. Now True Draco is obviously kind of playable in the normal and rare rarity festival event. You know, that definitely was a top contender, but in that event they did not have a lot of their good consistency boosting cards, so I'm almost wondering if Konami saw people not playing True Dracos that much in the previous event and they weren't really considering the consistency cards, and they were like, oh, I guess people don't want to play True Dracos in festival events, so we might as well not hit them as hard this time around, and this was definitely a mistake. So I'll admit here, I have not actually played True Dracos in this event. I have played against True Dracos a number of times, but this is kind of like a good starting deck list that a lot of people are using. Maybe the Solemn cards aren't that standard, but you can pretty much build True Dracos at full power in this festival. The only new hits in this deck are one copy of Dynamite and one copy of Maiden instead of being able to play multiple copies. Admittedly though, Maiden is usually only played as a one-of, so it's almost like the only changes were just losing two copies of Dynamite. For whatever reason, Skill Drain and Monarch's Erupt and the True Draco Apocalypse are all still at 3 copies per deck. Not to mention, now that we're not in the common and rare rarity festival event, we now have access to triple copies of Card of Demise and Pot of Duality, as well as our 1 copy of Dragonic Diagram. So True Dracos in this event are not only very powerful, but they're also a lot cheaper than a lot of the other top Synchro strategies. So in my build I was playing the Solemn cards, but if you cut those out of this deck, there are almost no ultra rares required to play it. And realistically, you could play the deck without Terraforming or Order. The deck would still be okay. So there is this thing where this is probably one of the cheapest decks in the entire format, and it just so happens to be one of the most boring decks to play against in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Now I think Konami had a little bit of foresight here because they did make the loner decks a lot better this time around. Specifically, I think that the Speedroid one is pretty good, but once again, this is kind of a long turn 1 spammy deck that ends on a bunch of negates, which is kind of what a lot of players are complaining about. I think the Synchro festival is in a weird place because while the common and rare festival had its problems, I think the format was overall more balanced than this one, and at the very least, I mean, the decks that were powerful in that format were obviously way less powerful than the decks that are good in this format. So I think if this came right after the Xyz festival event, maybe people wouldn't have complained as much about it, especially if Konami did leave the True Draco cards banned instead of leaving them around. But I think specifically because this is following up the common and rare event, this one looks a lot worse by comparison. Now, like I said, Konami has made improvements in this format. You know, they gave us good loner decks, they actually gave us some new cosmetics, which is pretty cool. So in the rewards list, as I talked about a few days ago, at the 5,500 mark, you get a Flower Gathering sort of base for your pet. And if you get to the max rank, although that might be kind of boring if you just play against True Draco the entire time, you get to the Synchro Festival 2022 title. These are good changes, but I do not understand why Konami left so many problematic cards unhit on this ban list compared to the Xyz Festival ban list. Maybe Konami figured that Synchro decks are inherently more powerful than Xyz decks. Not really sure why they would assume that, but I guess it could be a possibility. Therefore, they didn't think they needed to hit the True Draco cards as much as they did with the Xyz Festival, but personally, I just don't really see the point of leaving the True Draco cards in the format. I mean, keep in mind here, Konami clearly wanted to make control decks bad in this format. They banned Extravagance, they banned Multi-Faker, they banned Subterror Guru, but for some reason, True Dracos are allowed to pretty much play almost at full power. I mean, the Maiden hit basically doesn't matter. Maybe you would have played more copies of it with only 1 copy of Dynamite, but even without 3 copies of Maiden or Dynamite available, you can still play like the Waterfall card, for example, which can then just add the Dynamite to your hand. So it really seems like Konami hit a few decks that they thought would be problematic, but for some reason they left True Draco pretty much at full power. I don't understand why that happened. I feel like Konami at this point, for every single event, they probably should just ban all of the True Draco monsters. I think it is kind of a problem if you don't have any control decks in a format, you know, because admittedly without True Dracos, maybe every deck is just a spam deck, but right now from a deck building standpoint, it's kind of difficult as well. Do you play a bunch of back row removal cards to beat True Draco, or do you play a bunch of hand traps to beat like Adamancipators and Virtual World? There's kind of not really a great answer, and it feels kind of frustrating to play in the Synchro Festival. So basically, if you're a free-to-play player, you're either going to use the loner decks, which are better this time around, but obviously not as good as just building your own Synchro deck, or you could just build True Draco and probably win every time you went first. So at the end of the day, you're choosing between playing Synchro Spam, and there are a lot of decks that are available in that category, or you're playing True Dracos. I mean, there really isn't a middle ground between those two types of decks. And that is kind of a shame because there are a lot of cool Synchro strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh! That don't spam and don't play dumb back row cards like Monarch's Erupt and Skill Drain, but those decks are being kind of gate kept out of the format because the other decks are just so much more consistent and so much more powerful. Could Konami have done anything to prevent this event from being so spammy? Probably not, but I think at the very least they should have hit True Draco in some way. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about the Synchro Festival. I did recently run a poll on my channel, and it looks like a lot of you guys either played this event and didn't like it or haven't played the event yet, which kind of shows me that people aren't interested in it, because when I ran that same poll a few weeks ago for the normal and rare rarity festival, a lot more people seemed interested in playing in that festival. But this one, I think so far has been one of Konami's biggest misses when it comes to Master Duel, which is kind of a shame because they did make a number of improvements, but maybe the next time around Konami will make even more improvements to make it even better. I'm hoping the next festival is the Fusion event because that probably will be a little bit more fair, but we'll have to wait and see. I'll see you guys later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.